Nerdcore Creep here with another narration featuring stories submitted to the Horror Nerd subreddit. Today I'll be reading two scary tales from user WEPD1985. If you'd like me to read your stories, then please submit them to the Horror Nerd subreddit. The link is in the description. The subreddit is currently up to 20 members, which is a huge improvement from where it was only a month ago. So I'd like to see it grow even more. Remember, the subreddit isn't just for posting scary stories. Share your fan art, memes, narrations, and any questions you have for me or the subreddit as a whole. With that, let's get to the stories. So relax, turn off the lights, and have a creepy night. This story is true, and it happened to me in April 2017 in Caracas. My then-girlfriend, now wife, and I had been staying at my mother-in-law's apartment for a few weeks, because my mother's apartment, where we lived, was being remodeled at the time. For some context, the apartment where we were staying is located on the 4th floor of a relatively small 10th-floor building, which was positioned right in front of the city's main highway. I say small because there were very tall buildings in my city, which were as tall as 40 or 50 floors, and the people that lived in these buildings suffered greatly when the elevators did not work. Imagine going up and down the stairs for 50 or 60 floors. That's a lot of exercise for one day. So there were a lot of things I had to get used to in that place. Chief among them was hearing the sounds of cars, trucks, bikes, flat tires, damaged exhaust pipes, and occasional gunshots that came from the poor neighborhoods that were close to my girlfriend's home, which could be heard during the day and night. In contrast, my mother's neighborhood was usually very quiet, especially at night, so I had to change my sleeping habits a little bit. So I usually went to bed quite late at night, usually at midnight or 1 a.m. This apartment was smaller than my apartment and was located on a different side of the city, but I didn't care about those things as long as I could get a good night's sleep next to my wife, since I suffered from insomnia sometimes. The first time I came to my wife's apartment, I noticed there was a small hill with a huge tree, some medium, small-sized plants, bushes, and patches of grass, which were right next to the highway, and this seemed a little creepy to me at night. On that hill, I noticed there was a small makeshift aluminum shack. I thought that was a little funny, and I thought to myself, well, that's weird. Maybe some hobo or homeless person lives there. If he does, he must be crazy to be living there. On the first 2 nights I stayed there, even though I could hear the loud sounds of the highway, it took me a while to fall asleep, but fortunately everything was okay and I was able to get a good night's sleep on those 2 days. But the third night, as much as I wanted it to be exactly the same, it was quite different than the first. I remember it was late at night. I think it was midnight or even later, and I was almost sound asleep. I was listening to some horror stories on my cell phone to fall asleep to, just like I always did. However crazy that sounds. Suddenly, I was startled by the ear-piercing screams of some man or woman hurling a long string of F-bombs and other curses at somebody or something else. This woke me up right away and scared the hell out of me at the same time. I thought to myself, what or who the hell was that? And I shook my wife's shoulder and asked her, "Hey, honey, did you hear that?" And she was still asleep, but responded,
"Hear what? It was nothing. Go back to bed, honey."
However, I heard the curses again, so I decided to investigate what the heck was going on. I got up from bed, rubbed my eyes, and put on my slippers, walked slowly and quietly out of our bedroom towards the balcony, where I could clearly see the highway and the small hill next to it. Now, I could still hear the curses more clearly, and it sounded like the voice of a deranged man, and I thought to myself, maybe I was right, and there is indeed a homeless person living in that metal hut. I was now standing shirtless, in my boxers and slippers on the dark balcony looking to that hill, where I saw that metal hut on the first day I slept in my wife's apartment. Weirdly enough, I was able to see a small campfire and a barefoot man coming out of the shack, who had long, disheveled hair and a long, bushy beard. He was shirtless and wearing torn pants that were almost destroyed. He came out of the small shack. He was smoking a cigarette, and God only knows what drug he was taking. He was standing in that hill in the dark, screaming his lungs out and cursing a lot for some reason, while he was looking towards the highway. I thought this man must be crazy, getting high or drunk enough to be yelling at passing cars or the people or dogs that were all the way on the other side of the highway. This made me feel terrified, and I asked myself, what in the holy hell is that guy saying? Isn't he cold? Because of this racket, there were some neighborhood dogs barking in this man's direction. I thought it was really strange for someone to scream so much, especially this late at night. Unfortunately for me, my mother-in-law was a night owl and usually slept in the living room, so she turned on the kitchen's light out of the blue to get some water and went back to sleep, which reflected a little bit towards the balcony. I turned my head around and was a little blinded by the glare of the light, but at the same time I was scared that this man would see me staring at him. In that moment, I hid, crouched below the window so the man could not see me, but I was horrified when I saw this man walk to the fire and angrily put out the fire with his bare feet, turn his head around from the highway to look at the outer wall of the building, and all the while was still cursing out loud. I thought to myself, well, maybe he's having a bad trip or something. Suddenly, this crazy guy looked up at the building wall. He walked until he was right in front of it, and he yelled, "I can't take it anymore, and the voices are driving me crazy," and started to repeatedly bash his head into the wall until his head was bleeding, while he yelled, "Get out of my head!" The sound it made was terrifying. When he was done, he touched his head with his right hand and cleaned the blood on his chest. Now he looked crazier than ever. Out of the blue, the guy looked up and noticed I was staring at him. So he yelled at me, "What the hell are you looking at? Mind your own business, you idiot!" Therefore, I was scared to death, so I threw myself to the balcony's ceramic floor. I winced at how cold it was and hid there for a while. I thought to myself, out of sight, out of mind, right? The crazy guy kept screaming his curses at me. I decided that was enough for me and quietly crouched back to the bed. I felt horrified about what I saw and couldn't sleep anymore that night, since all I could hear were my mother-in-law's snores and the guy's screams until 2 a.m. The next day, I felt extremely tired because I was not able to rest the night before. I told my wife about what had happened, so she told me,
Yeah, at some point you get used to that crazy guy and his screams.
but she didn't believe that the guy bashed his brains into the wall and almost killed himself. So it dawned on me, what if I can hear this guy's screams tonight again? Should I call the cops on this guy? But I decided not to do it because my country's police are basically useless, so I still don't know what to do about this crazy screaming man. His awful screams still give me nightmares, but I know I will look out of the balcony at night again. Ever since I was a child, I've been terrified of werewolves and wolves as well, especially movies about them, and as a kid, I was crazy enough to watch them, but I covered my eyes whenever I knew the scary wolf was going to appear, so this obviously gave me terrible nightmares for most of my life. It was a Friday on Halloween night, my favorite holiday, 2016. At the time, I worked as an English teacher in a company I always thought did not appreciate me. On that night, I was planning to watch a horror movie marathon like I did every year. However, I was thinking about watching a werewolf movie that year. One of my coworkers recommended me an old movie called An American Werewolf in London. It sounded scary, but I really wanted to face my fears and give it a shot. On that day, I was very excited because I had already bought candy for the trick-or-treaters and some beer for me, but I wished I didn't have to go to work until 5 p.m. So as soon as I got off work, I took my things and left my office, drove my car home, which I called the Batmobile, to execute my plans. I listened to a song called Thriller, which I loved listening to on Halloween nights. I got home at 7 p.m. or so. Then I took a beer from my fridge, drank a long sip, and heard the door ring, which scared me for a second, but then I heard trick or treat behind the door. So I opened it, complimented the kids' cool costumes, and gave them candy. The trick-or-treaters kept visiting me until 8 p.m., and all the while I listened to heavy metal and ate ramen for dinner. After that, I grabbed my laptop and watched my horror movie marathon, and I left the werewolf movie for last. I sometimes had to pause to get another beer, and it scared the crap out of me, but I still thought it was a great movie, so I was 6 beers in and decided to go to sleep at midnight. That night, I had a terrible nightmare where I had to run away from a werewolf in a dark, foggy, and creepy forest, which was only lit by a full moon. In my dream, I was screaming my lungs out, and I felt extremely disoriented and afraid of the huge, bulky, black as night werewolf that was chasing after me. I ran for my life for what seemed like hours, but I felt the beast closing in on me. I turned around several times, and all I could see was its dark silhouette, bright red eyes and yellow teeth baring at me. Then I screamed again and ran a bit faster now. Out of the blue, I came across a huge fallen tree that blocked my way, so I had no choice but to jump over it. I heard the werewolf growling and panting behind me, so it jumped the tree too. While I was still mid-air, I felt a sharp pain on my back, and I woke up suddenly. Then I jumped out of my bed from fright, hit my body against the floor, and cursed. I rubbed my eyes, got up slowly. Out of nowhere, I felt a sudden and stinging pain on my back, just like in my dream. I tried reaching for the place where I felt the pain, but I couldn't reach it. So I went to the bathroom, washed my face, drank a bit of tap water, saw myself in the mirror, turned around, and to my horror, I saw 5 deep, bloody gashes on my back. I jumped forward and said, "What the hell is that?" The next day, I went to the hospital and got my wound patched up. I simply lied to the doctor and said my cat scratched me while I was sleeping. I obviously didn't own a cat. To this day, I still ask myself if that was just a crazy dream, or did my terrified mind somehow make it a reality? Who knows? The truth is, I never watched a werewolf movie again, since I was terrified that I would have another nightmare as vivid and terrifying as that one.